FTX exploiter starts selling the $294 million worth of EP stole. SBF's $28.4 million worth of jets might get seized and sold. U.S. national debt grows by $275 billion in a single day, and top Bitcoin miners post insane growth. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Crypto Daily. Got a bunch of news here today. A lot of it obviously circling around FTX and this whole trial that's been going on. So first thing, Bitcoin at 27.8. It's kind of been fluctuating. It hit 28K. Now you see it refreshed and it dipped to 27.5. So we kind of are bouncing in this 27K range. We'll see if we break out upside or downside. I think that's what everyone's kind of looking for. Will we drop below 27 or, try and test back for 30K? But ever since the SBF trials kind of started to heat up, the exploiter who stole almost $300 million worth of Ethereum from FTX has started to sell. So he moved another 36.8 million, and you can kind of see, and that was in the last 24 hours, and you can kind of see a couple different transactions he's done recently. So as this article says, after nearly 10 months of silence, the FTX exploiter began siphoning out the stolen funds. So he's been doing it in kind of small chunks, I guess small relative to the wallet size. The first chunk was 17 million. And what's interesting, obviously, I follow Thorchain. 65,000 ETH, which is about $108 million, was transferred through the Thorchain router. So I know some of it got swapped to Bitcoin. I think some got swapped to something else. But Thorchain is a decentralized liquidity protocol. And one of the, call it, benefits and negatives, like the double-edged sword of decentralization, is that there's there's no guard at the gate to say, hey, you can't do this, this is stolen money. So there's no guard at the gate, and that is the double-edged sword of decentralization, is that you both enable good actors to do good things and not have that gatekeeper. You also enable bad actors to do bad things and not have a gatekeeper. So this is going to be a growing conversation in the world of crypto, as these decentralized exchanges keep growing and gaining more popularity, is, at what point can you step in or have something to step in, or should you step in at all? And I think Thorchain's approach, from what I've seen, is that they shouldn't step in at all, because, they're a decentralized liquidity provider, and they provide the liquidity, they provide the payment rails and, the trading rails, and that's what they're there for. And how people use it is up to them, which, I tend to agree with. If you look at like the US dollar or, Bitcoin even, or, any fiat currency, there's always going to be bad actors, and there's always going to be ways for them to get around the system. So at the end of the day, is it a decentralized liquidity protocol's, responsibility to stop something like this? I personally don't think so. But like I said, it's going to be a conversation that keeps popping up. So SBF has two multi-million-dollar jets. Apparently, I'm surprised that they're not already, seized and sold. But apparently, they're in kind of this limbo, and the DOJ is trying to seize them so that they can sell them and pay back creditors. So the government has taken the position that both aircraft are subject to forfeiture as property purchased with the proceeds of fraud, while FTX claims ownership on the basis that alleged loans used to purchase the planes were not documented, said the filing by Island Air Capital, which is who he bought the planes from. So the first plane is worth $12.5 million, and the second is $15.9 million with financing provided from FTX. Who knows what's going to happen with this? I think we're just going to be in kind of like this whole discovery phase of this trial where, all this information is coming out. So, I didn't know that he had two, jets that were worth almost $30 million, but hopefully they get sold to pay creditors. And hopefully those creditors are retail investors, even though I think we all know that that's not how the game usually works. The money always goes back to the rich, the big institutions first. So we'll see what happens with that. This has been a evolving story, but yesterday $275 billion was added to the national debt for the U.S. in a single day. So the United States now has $33.4 trillion in debt. We've not run a budget surplus since 2001, which means that we've had 22 years of mismanagement, regardless of which political party is in power. Last year, the national government collected $4.9 trillion, but spent $6.27 trillion. This created a budget deficit of $1.38 trillion, which is the fourth highest in the 21st century. So, national debt is looming. It keeps getting worse. And I think what's crazy is that we're on pace this month to add over $1 trillion to the national debt. And, a big part of that is interest payments. So, with the high interest rates right now, the government is paying more in interest payments than it previously added to debt. So it's getting completely out of hand. And it's dangerous words to say, but it's starting to look a little bit like a death spiral. Obviously, the U.S. When you look at like Terra Luna, is like when death spiral comes to mind. That's what comes to mind for me. And obviously, there's a very big difference here between like the U.S. government and something like Terra Luna. The U.S. government has a lot of protocols, a lot of power, a lot of clout, if you will, that they can use to save themselves. So, I wouldn't say that they're gonna like like the dollar's not gonna just death spiral overnight, but it's starting to look pretty bad. So as the old saying goes, no one is coming to save you. You have to start thinking about how you will save, invest, and drive income in a world with an ever-increasing national debt, because that is exactly where it looks like we're headed. So, this national debt keeps getting worse. And I think this ultimately, and this is obviously as a Bitcoiner, and I think most of you probably have similar thinking. This should drive people into programmable money, that, you don't have just this ever increasing debt on your balance sheet. You don't have interest rates that can just be chosen on whim by one guy, at the Federal Reserve. This is what Bitcoin solves. This is the reason why we have Bitcoin is literally this. And it's only gotten worse since Bitcoin, was invented. So back in 2008, Bitcoin was invented because all these central banks, we kind of clearly saw where things were headed. Satoshi, whoever they are, saw where things were headed and decided that Bitcoin was the future solution to all this stuff. And I think, as this problem has gotten worse, and it has gotten a lot worse since then, the thesis for Bitcoin just keeps getting better. So Zero Hedge on Twitter, who's kind of covering all this stuff. Another day, another 33 billion at a rate of $1.4 billion in debt added per hour. So it's getting pretty crazy. I did see something, and I don't remember exactly what it was. There is a lot of debt that's mounting because it's the end of the year. That being said, this is still an unprecedented amount of debt that's being added. So definitely a story that we're going to be watching on a daily basis. I'm sure next time I record, there's going to be some other big piece of news related to this. BitMEX founder predicts 750,000 to $1 million Bitcoin price by 2026. I always love just like looking at random Bitcoin predictions. They're fun to think about, fun to dream about. But Bitcoin predictions tend to be completely off, no matter really who you look at. I don't think I've ever seen someone who nails Bitcoin predictions very well. But let's assume that he's even 10% correct, and we see 75,000 to $100,000 Bitcoin by 2026. I'd personally be happy. I've always said that I'd be happy to see Bitcoin grow at about 20% a year. If you see Bitcoin grow consistently 20% a year over a long time frame, I think that's healthy, both for the Bitcoin ecosystem and for, retail investors who have bought in and slowly buy in, people like me who dollar cost average into Bitcoin over a long period of time. I think, growing at a 20% per year average compounded rate is great. But obviously Bitcoin does what Bitcoin wants. Some years it's going to go up hundreds of percents. Some years it's going to go down, hundreds of percent. So just something to keep an eye on. And I always like to just, dream about these Bitcoin predictions, but not take them too seriously. So Bitcoin miners, Marathon and Riot are the ones I'll focus on because those are the ones I follow. They're growing at unprecedented rates. So Marathon's Bitcoin production rises 245%. Bitcoin mining firm Marathon Digital produced a total of 1,242 Bitcoin in September, a 16% increase from August, and a massive 245% increase from September 2022. So the amount of Bitcoin that they're producing just keeps scaling and scaling and scaling. And the reason why is because their exahashes, which is essentially how much power they have to mine Bitcoin, just keeps growing. So they had 3.8 exahashes per second in September 2022. And this September 2023, they had 23.1 exahashes. So they have scaled 10x, nearly 10x, and keep scaling. And they said there's no end to that scaling in sight. So Marathon said it now produced 8,610 Bitcoin year to date in 2023. The firm's balance sheet shows 13,726 unrestricted Bitcoin. So they produced 8,600 Bitcoin this year, and they're currently holding about 13,000 Bitcoin on their balance sheet. So obviously they're selling a pretty large amount of Bitcoin. Every miner does. They have to cover costs. They have to reinvest. But nice to see that they're holding some of it on their balance sheet. Riot Platforms increased its Bitcoin production by 9% month over month, producing 362 Bitcoin in September, while strategically curtailing mining operations. So what that strategically curtailing mining operations means is that Riot, and I've covered this before, has this agreement with their utility company where they can actually like basically turn off their Bitcoin miners so they can cut back, and that's what curtailing means. They can cut back on their Bitcoin mining, and in exchange, they'll get these energy credits, or they call them power credits, in exchange for not mining Bitcoin, essentially, and not using up that power. So by strategically curtailing mining operations, we also received $11 million in power credits pursuant to our long-term power contracts with our utility provider, and $2.5 million in demand response credits from participating ERCOT ancillary services program. So essentially, they've got this whole model of, we mine Bitcoin, but then we also have this agreement where we can make money by not mining Bitcoin. So it's actually really genius, and I've talked about it at length in another video, but it's a genius strategy, and they actually are, in the past couple of months have earned more money from not mining Bitcoin than mining Bitcoin. And the reason why I think that's cool is, the whole crypto industry, and when you look at projects, obviously I'm involved in Leo, bringing money from the outside in is a huge benefit to the ecosystem. Bringing money that has nothing to do with crypto, isn't already inside of crypto, but is, outside of the ecosystem, has a huge benefit, not just to the project. If you look at a small scale like Leo bringing in ad revenue, but you look at a big project or big company like Riot bringing money from the power companies that has nothing to do with Bitcoin mining, bring it into the ecosystem, I think is still powerful. So that's why I've liked Riot for the past couple of months and been keeping a close eye on it. But not all Bitcoin miners are doing well. So BitDigital, which also released results on October 4th, was one of a few firms whose Bitcoin production fell in September, recording a 7% fall to 130.2 Bitcoin. So one thing that I've been noticing with Bitcoin miners, and this happens with a lot of different industries, but a lot of the power is flowing to those top miners like Marathon and Riot. And that is at the expense of those smaller firms. So firms like BitDigital and others that are suffering a little bit because these other miners just keep growing and sucking up the industry. So Bitcoin mining, obviously something I always like to pay attention to. So last thing here, consumer debt crisis looms. Is the recession not in full effect yet? So, consumer debt is something that a lot of different people are keeping an eye on. I know like the All In podcasts or some people that I follow who talk about consumer debt. And one of the surprising things is like consumers have not slowed down yet. They're still buying a lot of stuff. But if you look at this heat map, you can see that it is slowly starting to tick down. It's just not noticeable yet. But at some point, this consumer debt crisis is going to take hold. And, if you look at consumer debt, it just keeps rising and rising and rising. Eventually, and credit card interest payments and credit card debt is at an all-time high. So eventually consumers are going to run out of juice. They're going to run out of credit. They're not going to be able to keep spending the way they've been spending, the way they've been accustomed to spending. Unless they start getting huge raises at work, spending is really going to start to slow down. So I know that, the Fed is trying to push us towards a soft landing, but all signs are pointing to a hard landing. And you look at, the national debt crisis, you look at the consumer debt crisis, and it's just, everything looks terrible. When you look, it's kind of like we're quickly headed to the edge of a cliff. What happens when we get to that edge? Will the Fed, drop interest rates? Will we see another like 2008 type of save? I don't know. We'll have to see. But those are the things I'm keeping my eyes on. Thanks for listening. Catch you guys tomorrow.